welcome to a new vlog and video in cooperation with ReiseJung. We're taking a look at days 7 and 8 on board of the first cruise with the Swiss Diamond. And here on the map you can see our route today. We're starting in Harlingen, where we arrived in the last video, and then we're sailing out on the Wadden Sea and on to the IJsselmeer to Hoorn and then on to Germany in Emmerich. Here we are, already arrived yesterday in the evening in Harlingen. You've already seen that in the last video, and now we're heading for one of the highlight excursions of this cruise. Whilst we also had a walking tour through Harlingen, we also had a speedboat tour. Before boarding our speedboat we can see the ferries onto the Frisian Islands, and here we can see our small speedboat called Phoenix. This is a ship that is also used as a water taxi, also going to the Frisian Islands, but it also offers small sightseeing tours to see some seals, and that's what we are gonna do in the next hour. So now it's time to board our boat, the Phoenix, and we got some explanations in English about safety on board and the boat and the tour itself, and then we were heading out onto the Wadden Sea. The weather was pretty good today, so even though the boat is going up to 60 kilometers per hour, it was still a very smooth ride. But if the weather is not so good, it can be very bumpy. That's why we classified this excursion as quite difficult and not possible for all guests, for example with back problems. And we also only sold around 8 to 10 places, because that's the amount of seats the boat has inside. But the weather was good, so we could also use the seats outside, and therefore we had a lot of space on the boat. We're now going with around 40 to maximum 50 kilometers per hour to the seal banks, where we can see the seals. See them in the distance. Of course we cannot get too close to them, we have to keep a safety distance to not disturb the animals, and of course that's very important, to not disturb them. And of course with all excursions where you're going to see some animals, you cannot guarantee that you're actually gonna see the animals, but we were very lucky, we saw a lot of them. Even baby seals were there, and the animals were quite active, so we didn't only see them laying down, but we also saw them moving, so that was very nice. And of course it was a very pleasant excursion. The guests were very happy to see so many of the seals. Of course it's always a bit sad that you cannot get closer to the animals, but of course it's more important to preserve the nature, to not disturb the animals and to not get them in any danger. So of course we have to keep some distance, and all respectable boat operators will also not get close to them at all. So of course that's very important. In the background we can see them big ferries, and of course you can also do a tour like this with bigger regular boats. They're not gonna get any closer to the animals, but they're not as fast, so the tours are taking a bit longer. For us it was just 1 hour, around 15 to 20 minutes to go to the seals, 20 minutes there and then back to Harlingen. Here we can see a regular ferry going to the Frisian Islands, and that was quite fun to meet her because she was making some big waves, so we at least get a little impression of what it feels like to be on a speedboat when there is rough seas. As you can see, that looks a bit different then. That was also a lot of fun. We were then heading into the stern wave of the big ferry, where there were some big standing waves, so it was also quite fun to go through them here. And for the last couple of kilometers we were going full speed. The boat can go up to almost 60 kilometers per hour. We're mainly going with like 40 to 50 kilometers per hour, but for the last minutes we were going full speed. Of course that's a lot of fun, and it's quite nice to have such an excursion. That was also the idea behind that excursion. Of course there's always this cliche that excursions on a river cruise are like river cruises themselves, boring and just for old people. But I think here you can clearly see that doesn't have to be the case, because river cruises are also quite interesting for people that are still working and they need some time to relax. A river cruise is the perfect thing you can do, but of course even if you're relaxing you can still enjoy a bit of action in between, and that's what we did with this very nice excursion. All guests were very happy, and in the end we were even sailing past our beautiful Swiss Diamond before heading back on board. Here we can see her, our beautiful home, the Swiss Diamond, and then we were docking again. It was time to say goodbye to the wonderful Phoenix. It was a lot of fun, and with leaving the ship it was also almost time to leave the port of Harlingen. Here we can see the interior of the Phoenix, and then we're heading back to the ship, back to the Swiss Diamond, because now we are also leaving the port, watching the ferries again and some other ships in port, and then we were also heading out on the Wadden Sea. So actually we're now going on the sea with a river cruise ship. That's possible because this part of the seas is protected by the islands, Frisian Islands, and therefore it's also available for river ships to sail on. But it's still quite an interesting thought to go on the ocean with a river cruise ship, even though it's just the Wadden Sea. You can see that no land in sight. It was quite spectacular, and of course almost all guests were up on the sun deck to enjoy this very special moment of the cruise. Actually almost all cruise ships are capable of sailing here on the Wadden Sea. The Swiss Diamond for sure is capable of, because she's also classified for sailing on coastal waters, for example in northern Germany. So for her it's no problem at all. Here we can see the Phoenix in the background coming back from her second tour this day. Our captain told us that usually it's sailing as a water taxi and ferry to the Frisian Islands, but every now and then they are also doing the tours to the seals. Not too frequently, and it was quite rare that they have two of these tours on the same day. But of course it was a very nice tour, and I can highly recommend taking a tour with the Phoenix to the seals if you're somewhere near Harlingen. Here we can see the Afsluitdijk, the closure dike in the Netherlands, which is separating the Wadden Sea from the IJsselmeer. Before this dike was built, the IJsselmeer was part of the ocean of the Wadden Sea and was called the Zuiderzee, but now it is a lake and it's called the IJsselmeer. And here we are on the IJsselmeer, which is a very, very big lake. At some points you don't have any land inside, so it is quite impressive. In the meantime, we had another fantastic lunch on board, and then we were continuing with full speed to our next destination in Hoorn, where we have a nice boat tour in the afternoon. Here we are slowly approaching Enkhuizen. Enkhuizen is located at the end of the IJsselmeer, and there's another dike that is separating the IJsselmeer from the Markermeer. Both lakes used to be the Zuiderzee, and then they built a dike called Hoorn, and then they wanted to drain the lake and get some additional land for the Netherlands, but this plan was then rejected and the lake was kept, but we still have the dike in between, and therefore there's also a lock in between, and we're going now into probably the most spectacular lock of the Netherlands. It's called a naviduct, and that's not only a lock, but it's also an aqueduct. We have seen aqueducts before. An aqueduct is a bridge over a street, so the ship is going on a bridge over a street, but in this special case, on the bridge there is also the lock, so it's a lock on a bridge over a road. Quite unique. The naviduct here is the first of its kind in the world. It is very impressive and quite weird. As you can see, those views are quite interesting. You're on the sun deck of a ship and you see the cars below you, and then you know that you're actually not just on a bridge but also in a lock, so it was very, very impressive to see, and I was happy to finally be able to see that naviduct, because I was here mainly with 135 meter long ships and they are not able to go through it because it's only 125 meters long, but with our Swiss Diamond it was finally my time to see this interesting building in person. Of course, I spent most of the time on the sun deck, but also the view from my office was quite interesting. And here we are leaving the naviduct again, and now we are on the Markermeer, and we're heading to our next destination in Hoorn, where we are arriving in the afternoon. Here we can see the port entrance of Hoorn, also a very beautiful city. We've been there with the Swiss Splendor already in the beginning of this year, and we had the same excursion, a boat tour with the water taxi Hoorn, which is always very well booked. A lot of passengers want to do this excursion and they are all coming back very happy because it is a very nice excursion. Whilst the first 2 boats were on their way, we visited Het Kleine Café aan de Haven, in which a famous Dutch and German song was written, called Het Kleine Café aan de Haven, or in German it's Die kleine Kneipe. And we waited there until the first boats were almost back, and then we went back to the ship, picked up the next group and brought them to the boats. Here you can see them. Both tours with 2 boats were fully booked, and all guests were very happy because it is, as I said, a very nice excursion. You're gonna get some explanations about Hoorn, you're gonna see the city, and you can also get unlimited free drinks. After the second tour started, we had also something very special planned for the evening. Even though the food on board the Swiss Diamond is amazing, we wanted to have a different experience on this day. We visited a Michelin restaurant called Haven, and there they have a very interesting style of kitchen because they are not offering the typical menu sequence in a restaurant, but almost all of their dishes are like small main courses, each for everyone separate, but all together they make a very nice and interesting menu. Of course the last courses are sweet, but otherwise they're not following this very strict like French traditional menu sequence. Very nice restaurant, can highly recommend a visit there. And after that we left Hoorn again during a beautiful sunset, heading out on the Markermeer, and now we're heading back to Germany. Our next port will be Emmerich in Germany, but until then it will take a couple of hours because it's quite far away. So now we can enjoy sailing on the Markermeer in the evening. It was a very fantastic, beautiful evening, and we stayed out for quite a while. As you can see, it is already getting dark and we're still on the Markermeer. We're now heading to Amsterdam. There we're going on the Amsterdam-Rhine Canal, then we're getting on the Waal, and then we're reaching the Rhine again, on which Emmerich is located. And as you can see, even when it was completely dark outside, we were still on the sun deck, as it was a fantastic, warm, nice evening. On the next morning when I woke up, we were shortly before Nijmegen. Traditionally, you would stop here in Nijmegen instead of Emmerich, but as this was planned as a normal cruise for our ReiseJung passengers and we didn't know that NOC Jazz Band is going to charter the ship, we tried something else, as almost all of our guests have already been to Nijmegen. As you maybe know from my other videos, you can see some wild horses, the Konig wild horses, shortly after Nijmegen, and we were extremely lucky. I've never seen so many of those wild horses before. It was a fantastic and wonderful morning seeing all those beautiful animals. We've also saw yet another Fährhafen ship. Those are the most powerful ships on the River Rhine, always impressive to see them. I think you can see that here quite well. And then we're heading on to Emmerich. So, as I said, we decided to go to Emmerich instead of Nijmegen to discover a new city. And on our way there we had a morning pint. In German it's called Frühschoppen, and here we can see the impressive Rhine Bridge of Emmerich. And here we can see the city itself. We're docking in the south of the city, and then it was time to discover this new destination for us. But unfortunately, quite fastly, we discovered that Emmerich is not the most beautiful city on our tour. It was Sunday, so almost all shops were closed, but also a lot of shops were closed for good. There were just a few cafes here on the Rhine promenade. That was pretty nice, but the rest of the city unfortunately was quite underwhelming. The weather was also not perfect, and our impression and the feedback from the guest was pretty clearly that we shouldn't go back to Emmerich. We were quite surprised because, of course, on pictures the city is looking very nice, and also big cruise companies like Arosa are stopping here quite frequently, also for the whole day, but there's just not that much to do. We had a nice excursion, but that was mostly it. 2 churches that are quite worth seeing, are also very nice, but that's basically it. So of course we decided to not come back to Emmerich, so next time maybe Arnhem is possible again, otherwise we will stop in Nijmegen once again. And that's also quite typical for ReiseJung. We're always trying out new ports, we're trying to discover new cities, and every now and then we also have to say, okay, that was a try, but it was not perfect. As you can see here, it's not the most beautiful city, so in this case we're not coming back, and next time we will try a different port or go back to the port that the other companies are also using, like Nijmegen. But there was a quite nice little concert in the church. And now it's time to head back on board. We made our decision, Emmerich is not worth a stop. Next time we're gonna try something else. And now it's time for yet another fantastic dinner on board before heading on to our next destination in Düsseldorf. So why didn't we go to Düsseldorf straight away? That's not possible because you always have to consider the working hours of the captains for safety reasons. With Jew captains you cannot sail longer than 18 hours and then you need to stop somewhere for at least 6 hours, and that's what we did here in Emmerich. It's not possible to go from Hoorn to Düsseldorf within these 18 hours, and so we needed a port in between. Usually it would be Nijmegen, but this time we tried out Emmerich, and that's something that's typical for ReiseJung, that we're always trying to discover new cities, because in my opinion it also belongs to traveling to see cities that are maybe not the most beautiful ones, but it's still interesting to see new cities, and sometimes you then can say, I don't have to come back here again. But it's also a part of traveling. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Here you can see when the next video will be uploaded, the last one from this cruise, and also the name of the song. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, or share the video link, and I hope to see you in my next video again.